Hello,
Hi, Nolitando.
how are you?
All good, thanks. How are you doing?
I am good, thank you. Um, I think we'll wait shortly. We'll just start it in like 60 seconds. That's
All
six.
right, cool.
Hi, everyone. Please indicate if you can hear us.
Yep, should be all good.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. For those who don't know me, I'm Cassandra. I'm a research consultant at Amnesty South Africa. And with me is Nolitando Sitole. And Nolitando, would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Okay, I will. Okay, my name is Noluthando Sitole. I am a director at Children of Success. Children of Success is an NGO that does work around teenage pregnancy and financial literacy. So we do a lot of our mandate is basically focused on teenage pregnancy and financial literacy.
Thanks, Nolitando. And for those of you who don't know, Amnesty International is a global movement of people who take injustice personally. And we're a movement fighting for the realization of human rights, all human rights for all persons. And we're really excited to be part of this conversation. And just to set a little bit of the context of why this was such an important issue for us. Um, we learned earlier this year that there's been a 48.7% increase in the number of births or deliveries to girls between the ages of 10 and 14. And this was a study of births in 2017 to 2021. So 48.7% increase, that's a huge increase. And early pregnancy, which is referring to, birth to girls between 10 and 14 and adolescents. So it's children and adolescents. It's such a major issue that touches on so many different human rights that intersect. This is the start of a series of lives that we're going to have just unpacking early pregnancy. What are the causes? What are the consequences? And what we can do about it. Yeah, maybe in this first session, we're going to start talking about causes, what's driving these numbers. And Nolatanda, do you want to just start us off by just talking about some of the driving factors that you found in your work?
Okay, cool. And just to add on what you've just said, there's been a steadily increase on on teenage pregnancy because there's another research that showed that from 2017 till 2021, on average, teenage pregnancy in South Africa has been increasing by 17%. So just for context, for people to understand, if I'm saying a 10-year-old kid is getting pregnant, that is a grade 5, grade 6 learner getting pregnant, right? So before we go on to the causes, let's define it, because I think definition is very important. So people use teenage pregnancy, some use adolescent pregnancy, some use early pregnancy, right? The definition in terms of the World Health Organization is basically looking at kids between the ages of 10 and 19. That's the definition in terms of the World Health Organizations, but different countries may have different definitions depending on what they deem to be teen. But I think we can use that standard one. The second question that you asked is, what are the drivers? Yo, there are multiple drivers, but I think we will touch on a few. I think the first one is that I'd like to touch on is the lack of sexual education within our community. And just think about it between me and you, right? Growing up, our parents, we never had the sex talk, firstly. And secondly, even if you had the actual sex talk, it was from a traumatic perspective in terms of, okay, you're on your period now, run away from boys. You need to stop playing outside. And you are confused as a kid in terms of why does what does my parents have to do with sex? And I think it's also links to the second one, which goes to communications, breakdown in communication between the parents and the children, right? The third one, which is also a very common one in South Africa, is poverty. So you find that kids might be forced to get into relationships simply because the guy is able to provide, and then there's power dynamics within that relationship where someone can't say no, and where basically they are now negotiating and going into a relationship out of the stomach, out of hunger. And linking that linking that cause to the next cause, which is sexual violence and rape. The stats in South Africa speak for themselves. Basically, about every 30 seconds, a woman is raped in South Africa. And that woman can be an adult, that woman can be a teenager. And I think also, just to elaborate on rape is not always the violent rape that we see on in media houses, right? Where you're finding that a baby got raped or a grandmother got raped. But rape is also in the context of where a girl walks into a relationship simply for financial benefits, and she can't voice it out, where she says, I'm not comfortable. And a guy feels entitled to her body. That's also rape. So yeah, rape is also a huge one. Education is also a huge one, where lack of basically formal education is also a huge one. In other parts of the world, especially because teenage pregnancy is not only a South African problem, it's been on a steadily rise in developing nations, or nations that were formerly known as third world countries, right? Child marriage is also a huge one. And in the South African context, we call it used to be called uktwala, right? So there's been a lot of, we'll give it up to the government in terms of that. They've done a lot of work in rural areas to try and stop that process, and even putting in legislation in place, right? So child marriage is also a huge one in other countries. And then we're looking at also forced marriages, which also sort of links with the culture of Uktwala, where what would traditionally happen is, if a girl doesn't want to get married, date you or get married to you, you would kidnap the girl, right? And then the other one is, which I think is also a huge one, because in South Africa we've got a drinking problem, right? Is substance abuse. So substance abuse, which then links back to the rape culture. Simply because someone is intoxicated does not necessarily mean that you can have sex with her, or you can rape her, in fact, violate her sexually, right? So those are some of the causes that I would touch on that are linked to the South African context, because we can go even further in terms of even parenting style, and parental care is also a huge cause around it. But yes.
Yeah, I know I threw you a huge question right at the beginning, but this is something that we're going to unpack throughout this hour together. And I think maybe one thing that we could start on is rape, and what you've mentioned already about, sexual violence being so huge in our country. I think one of the stats is that 1 in 3 children are victims of sexual violence by the time they reach the age of 18. We know that rape itself, the numbers are so high. And what stood out for me when looking at the early pregnancy numbers was that 10 to 14-year-old bracket, that there were at least, almost 3,000 girls who gave birth between the ages of 10 and 14. And the law is very clear that children who are under the age of 12 do not have the capacity to consent. So we're dealing with a whole number of rape cases against children. And we know that this implicates the criminal justice system. How is the criminal justice system dealing with this? Do they have enough rape kits? Are police investigating properly? Is there going to be justice at the end of the road for children who experience this? So I think the topic of rape and gender-based violence is something that resonates really strongly when we're talking about early pregnancy. So I think maybe just to touch on the laws a little bit more, Nolutando, there is, like I said, children under the age of 12 cannot consent, but there is a bracket of consent that's allowed between children of the ages of 12 and 15. And this is because the law has developed to recognize that children have some capacity to consent and are learning more about their bodies. So children can have sexual activity with their peers within that age bracket. But if it's anyone outside of that age bracket, anyone who's 16 and older who's having sex with a minor, that would be rape or statutory rape. And that's really important to understand that distinction and to understand the language around rape and sexual activity, because it's such we don't want it to be a gray area. We want children to understand and people to understand their rights and when there's been a violation. So yeah, I don't know if we want to start there and yeah, maybe talk a little bit to that.
Maybe let's start it way back in terms of defining what is consent. And I think that is also important because the law is very clear in terms of what consent is. Basically, the law says consent is a voluntary or unforced agreement. So bear in mind in terms of voluntary or unforced agreement, right? And I think the second thing is then, okay, what is voluntary? What is unforced? Does it have to be verbal? Doesn't it have to be verbal? So consent it can be non-verbal, right? But I think the most important thing that people or teenagers or wanting to start engaging and wanting to start engaging in sexual activity and wanting to start understanding consent. Consent, I think the principle of consent is all about how do you communicate with each other whenever you are within a relationship, situationship, or whatever, whenever you're engaging in sexual activity. I think the communication part is very important, and that's why at the foundation of the consent is how do we communicate. And there's an acronym that I like about consent. Basically, when people remember, I love fries, right? So let's break down fries, right? It means that F stands for consent can be freely given. R stands for it can be reversible, so it can be withdrawn. So at any point, I can agree to say, you know what, I'm comfortable you kissing me, but at some point, I'm like, no, I'm no longer comfortable. So that's withdrawing of it, right? I, it's informed, right? E is enthusiastic, right? So it's not coerced, where someone is like, yes, they're unsure of, where it's not coerced. It's where you understand that there's a power dynamic around it. And S is specific. And that's very important because just because I give you consent maybe for you to kiss me does not necessarily mean I give you consent for you to take off my clothes or for you to sleep with me. So that's also very important in understanding consent. Just because I've agreed beforehand that you can sleep with me, that does not mean that for future engagement, that's consent for you to sleep with me. So I think that's also very important before we go into the laws, the nitty-gritties of it, and just understanding the foundation of it. The foundation of it is communicate. And that is the foundation of consent, where, like, examples of how you can ask is, are you comfortable with this? Is it okay? Can I do this? That's consent. And what is not consent? And I think that's really clear in terms of just because you take someone on a date does not mean that you are entitled to sleep with that person. Just because you pay for someone's drinks does not entitle you to sleep with that person. And no means a no. So this culture of where guys and girls are being groomed to a no means a partially yes if I can beg around, a no means a no. If a person says I'm not comfortable, that means a no, right? What other things are consents or are not consents? Basically stuff like okay, the violent rape where you're forcing someone, that's not consent. And also in the topic of consent, I think it's very important to also realize that if a person says, yes, you can sleep with me, but let's use protection, and you decide to remove that protection, that is rape. So that's also very important in understanding consent. So yeah, I think maybe we can move over to the laws. Is there anything else that you have on mind where we can discuss while we're discussing about consent?
Yeah, I think you've touched on a number of examples, and I really like them. And I want to go through a few more examples just so that this idea of consent can be a lot more clear and a lot more practical, because the laws can be a mouthful and they can be a lot to digest. So I think let me just go over the law one more time, and then we can come back to a few more practical examples of what this actually looks like. So I see we have a comment here. We say, I think we need to use the specific sleep with versus sex with here. Thank you for your comment, and please keep adding comments as we go through the discussion, and we'll come back to them. So just to go back to the law, we're dealing, when we talk about consent, we're dealing with the Criminal Law and Sexual Offences Act. And to start off with, the age of consent in South Africa is 16. And children below the age of 12 do not have capacity to have sex. So if you're having sex with anyone under the age of 12, that is rape. But with children between the ages of 12 and 15, there is some capacity for them to have sex within their age bracket. But if it is anyone who is more than 2 years older, that can be statutory rape. So for example, if there is a 16 and a 17-year-old involved, the law is very specific that 16 and 17-year-olds can't have sex with anyone who's more than 2 years younger than them. So say, for example, you're 14 years old and you're in a relationship with a 17-year-old and you're wondering about what the law says about that type of relationship. Well, if you're having sex with your partner who's 17 years old and you're 14 years old, that could be an offense. And it's just because of understanding the power dynamics, like Nolutando, like you spoke to, and the fact that at those different ages, can consent be fully informed? Can it be freely given when there is that element of power in the relationship? So yeah, maybe let's unpack what the law in terms of practical examples like that.
So just to add on something, a simple example, which is very common in school, is like a matric boy having a relationship with a grade 8 boy. I mean, a grade 8 girl. Or a grade 11 having a relationship with a grade 8. So just to put a context to it in terms of, so if you are a matric boy, if you're in matric and you're in a relationship with a grade 8, right, who's 13, roughly 14, you cannot have sex with that person, because once you have sex with that person, that is deemed as rape because you're 18. So I just wanted to clarify in terms of that. But a grade 8 and a grade 8 with a grade 8 or grade 8 with a grade 9, they can easily be in a relationship and it can be sexual. and it's not deemed as rape. But the moment you are, because roughly the average school age is you are 16 when you're in grade 10. So the moment you are a grade 10 having a relationship maybe with a grade 8 who's 13, that's already 3 years older, that is deemed as rape.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really important to be very clear on that. And I really like the example. Always good to remember your age brackets, and always good to make sure if you're 12, if you're starting to experiment, make sure that it's with your peers. It's not with anyone older than 15. Um, but we had a Q&A, sort of like true and false, yes and no type of question ahead of this live. And I'm gonna ask some of the questions. Maybe you in the live room have already answered the questions, but if you could pop some answers in the chat, it would be cool to make this a little bit more interactive. So one of the questions here is true or false? Consent is only about whether a person says no. True or false? And I think in the poll, 61 of you said false and 2 of you said no. And the answer is false, but let's unpack why it's false. Is it not true that consent is, like when a person says no, that's they're indicating that they're not consenting. But what other indicators are there that someone is perhaps not is perhaps unhappy with what they're doing with you?
I think as people, the one thing that's important as teenagers, we all have a sixth instinct where we know when someone is uncomfortable. Like, let's say you are both teenagers, you're home alone, it's all good and well, parents are not around, and this girl's like, I'm not comfortable, or I'm not ready. You keep on trying to negotiate. Negotiation is not consent. A no is a no. Her saying I'm not comfortable, her body language tensing up, her saying I'm not ready is her indicating to you that I'm not comfortable with what you're doing. And it can go vice versa, because also, as much as we're looking at girl children, speaking about it in the context of girls, but you find that also guys might be dating older girls, right? Or it might be even the same age girl where the girl wants to experiment and the guy's like, I'm not comfortable, I'm not ready. Their body language is indicating that. So those are some of the examples I would want to give, where we all know when we were in high school, stuff like someone going to a house party, and yes, you guys are dating, but then all of a sudden you have this expectation that because it's a house party, you need to you want to sleep with her. That is not consent. That is not her agreeing. Someone says someone could be pulling their clothes to someone could be pulling their clothes to cover more of their body, and he is showing that they're not comfortable. Yes, that's very true.
Mm. I think body language is so important because there's those small indicators like that. And like you said, it goes back to communication and the fact that consent has to be enthusiastic. And things like, for example, pulling their clothes over to show that they're uncomfortable, or, like the look on their face, the tensing up, small things like that could be an indicator. And you have to be very aware and very in tune with your partner to see and if you're unsure, ask if they're happy, ask if they're fine with it. But yeah, the answer is false. Consent is not only when a person says no. You have to really pay attention to body language, and if you're unsure, just ask. Yeah.
And I think it's important to also establish that simply because you're in a relationship with someone or you did favors for someone, that does not entitle you to any sexual favors, from kissing to uh, sexual activities, be it oral, be it penetration. And I think if you establish that principle within your mind that dating a person does not mean that I am entitled to a person's body, is then very important, even when it comes to situations where a person says I'm not comfortable, because then that already, that principle is established that, listen, I'm not entitled to anything from this person, and they need to be comfortable enough for them to want to have sex with me.
Exactly. And it goes for like short-term, long-term relationships, marriage. You're never entitled to somebody else's body. It's you always have to ensure that there is consent. You always have to ask and to make sure that consent is willingly given. But it becomes, I think, so easy for us to get into that mindset of like comfort, or, like this is how things usually go. So this is my expectation and I want this to happen. Like the example of the house party, where you have that expectation that you're going to do something. Um, but it always comes back to the individual's autonomy and their right to say no, or to express that they're not happy in any other way, and for that to be respected.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple more questions on the poll that we had, and one other one was, uh, children below the age of 12 do not have the capacity to consent. I think we've covered that one. That's true. The law is very clear that children under the age of 12 do not have capacity, and if there is sexual activity, that could be rape. Um, I'm trying to see if I had any
And
other
also,
questions. Yeah,
just
sorry.
to add on something, even as parents and as adults, right, it's also important for us to even take accountability and responsibility, right? If your grade 8 kid is sexually active with a matric learner, why are you not reporting that to the police? Why are you not standing up? If you know that, for example, 12 is about grade 6, right? If you know that grade 5, grade 6, whatever, your kid is sexually active, right? Why are you not reporting that to the law? And I think it's important, even with us, uh, as we unpack this, because I know that there might be adults that are watching this where they also take a proactive step towards reporting these type of rape cases, where we don't only find out about these rape cases simply because the lady has conceived, but be proactive in terms of, if you know certain situations. I think it's also very important for adults to also not sweep things underneath the carpet.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because in our communities, from in my communities, because I can only speak for my own, is there is that tendency to want to brush over things, to want to protect, like family image, or like community, your family name or whatever. And it is, like you said, so important that parents do ensure that they're protecting their child first, not their brothers or their fathers or whoever could be abusive. And because the stats are so widespread, and because there's so many taboos around, like talking about sex and talking about consent and even talking about sexual violence within families, that it's so important that adults step up and start having these conversations, and themselves also start teaching children, that if somebody touches you inappropriately, you come and tell me. And so that children know that they have that safe space, and that they know that their parent or their guardian will be there to protect them, to report a violation if it happens, so that children know that they have someone to go to, and that they don't have to sit with this when something happens.
Yes,
Right.
I'll give you, sorry, just to give you an example of a situation where that happened, right? So I am currently based in a small town called Newcastle in KwaZulu-Natal. in a nearby town, Dundee, right? There was a teacher that was in a relationship with a grade 8 learner. And the mother acknowledged, saw that, and literally the family then reported that to the police. So they didn't even negotiate with the girl in terms of what are you doing with an older man, whatever, whatever, whatever. They went straight to the police. The police, the teacher was in custody the last time I checked. So it's examples like that, because the moment we start stepping in as adults and we start stepping in as a society and setting precedents, we also then are, yes, as much as the criminal justice is failing us, right? But we also then now are empowering the kids to be able to speak up and not fall into a trap of peer pressure, because you find that that girl might have started dating the teacher simply because the teacher has a bit of extra cash. I don't come from a well-off family, so whenever there are socials, whenever there are little things like socials, or I need to touch up money, or I need lunch money, and that's the peer pressure of the society that we live in terms of wanting to show up. And people then start making decisions under duress.
Yeah. And I think another powerful benefit of having adults playing that role is that children then know that when they have questions, like questions about their bodies, questions about sex and contraceptives, they know that they have a trusted source of information to go to. So when parents open that channel of communication, then you know that at least children can get safe and reliable information, as opposed to getting it from dodgy websites or from people who have ill intent and want to harm them. So yeah, very important that adults step up and open those channels of communication with their children. Because another factor that you spoke about earlier is also education. And one of the things that we found in our research as well is that comprehensive sexuality education plays such a huge role in decreasing early pregnancies. But education doesn't just come from schools alone, it comes from our communities as well, and our parents and our churches and religious institutions. So everyone has like a role to play in it. Yes.
Your network is going in and out. Can you maybe switch off your video camera so that
sure.
We don't lose you?
No problem. Let me just switch that off. Where did you lose me?
So you're talking about the importance of the community.
Yes, yeah, and just that everybody has a role to play in this, because education just doesn't come from schools. It comes from your parents and your religious and other institutions around you. And yeah, just driving the fact that education is such an important tool to also deal with early pregnancies, because girls are then able to make better informed decisions about their bodies.
And that's important. Education is empowerment, knowledge is power, and it allows you to make informed decisions and correct decisions. Yes, so yeah, I think we can move on to the next poll.
Okay. So the next one was, can children between the ages of 12 and 15 consent to sexual activity with persons within the same age bracket?
That was almost a tie, but what are you guys thinking in the audience?
Yeah, there was almost. So 33 people said yes, and 31 people said no. Very interesting, I think, also because the law has changed relatively recently around this. And I think a lot of people still are not quite sure about what the age of consent actually is. But I see a couple of people coming in saying, yes, they can. And yeah, you're correct.
But also there's a disclaimer on that one, because remember, they need to not be above 2 years older. So, for example, if a 12-year-old girl is, or 12-year-old child, teenager, right, whether it be a girl or boy, they can only consent up until 14. Because anything more than 2 years then becomes a tricky power dynamic again.
Mm. Yeah, and it's the same with the 16 and 17-year-olds,
Yes.
where then if a 16 and 17-year-old engages with sex with anyone 2 years younger, then that would be statutory rape as well.
Yeah.
And that was our next poll. Is is it considered statutory rape when a 16 or 17-year-old engages in sexual activity with someone who's 3 years younger? And the answer there overwhelmingly was yes. 52 people said yes, and 12 said no. But yeah, like Nolutando said, that would be yes.
And I think it's important to unpack even the definition of statutory rape. It's called statutory rape, even though you two as a couple have agreed on, okay, we're gonna date, or we're gonna have sex together, right? Um, it's called statutory rape because it's illegal uh, in terms of the law. So I think it's important to understand the law and understand the impact that it has on you.
Yeah, exactly. And I really like your acronym FRIES when it comes to understanding the consent part of it. So even if you are having sex with someone in your age bracket, to understand that that also needs to be like freely given, informed, um, enthusiastic, and
Reversible.
specific. Yeah. So one of the other questions we had written down was, can consent be reversible? And I like the examples that you gave of, like you can consent to one thing and not consent to another thing. You can consent to kissing, but you that doesn't mean that you're consenting to penetrative sex. And if you're giving consent for one thing, you can always reverse that consent. You can always say no in the middle of that act, and it's important for people to know that.
I think it is, and I think the most the it's very important for people to know that. But at the core of consent is communication, guys. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Educate yourself. There's a lot of information around consent. Ask where you are failing. There are NGOs like us, where you can DM us and ask, and we'll be able to respond, right? And most importantly, you are not entitled to anyone's body. Um, and I think that is super, super important, where you understand that just because you're in a relationship, just because you are taking out a girl on a date, does not mean that you're entitled to their body. Even from a simple thing as kissing can be sexual violation, because if she said no and you forcing yourself on her or on him, that you are violating that person.
So we also had another poll, Nolutando, on children of success, on contraceptives, and consent as well. Should we go to that now?
Yes, we can go to that.
Okay, cool. Um, so the first poll was, in the case of consensual sex between heterosexual people, whose job is it to prevent pregnancy?
Let's hear from the audience. Is it the female, the male, or both?
Who, in your opinion, do you think would be responsible?
For both.
So from the poll we've got about 12% of people said female, and 0% said male. I see some comments coming through saying both.
But yes. Yes, 88% said both. And I think it's very important for us to clarify that you guys are both responsible for preventing teenage pregnancy because it takes two to tango. It takes two to have sex. And there is, yes, the girl might be going through the changes, but it's equally as a guy who's participated in that activity in the sexual activity, it is also your responsibility. We can move on to the next poll.
Okay. What are your thoughts on contraceptives? And the options are I prefer to always be on birth control, or I just use the morning after pill if need be.
So
What
maybe
and
we can. Sorry. Yes.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying maybe we can unpack that one.
Okay. So also for the audience, let's hear from you also what your preferences are in terms of contraceptives and birth control, whichever you prefer. 71% of people on the poll said that they prefer to always be on birth control, and 29% said that they prefer using the morning after pill if need be.
Um, and I think the most important thing to consider is that prevention is better than fixing a problem. So I think with the morning after pill, although it's effective, but there's just so many risks around it in terms of the timing around it. Did you use it at the correct time? In terms of the period where within 24 hours, etc. So I think contraceptives and birth control are the most important. It's the most important one where you know exactly that, okay, beforehand, I've gone to the clinic, I've gotten my injection, or I've gotten my whatever form of birth control you want to have, and it's the
Also, just to add that with the morning after pill, if you use it too often, it also reduces in efficacy. It's not as effective if you use it too often. So you can't use it in the same way that you're using your monthly or daily birth control. Um, yeah, and it's important to know that because sometimes we think, oh no, let's use the morning after pill, but after a while, it's just not as effective, and you're putting yourself at risk. Um, but if it's an emergency situation, if, for example, if you were on birth control and you fell ill, you had like a runny tummy or something like that, then it's important to also use the morning after pill as a backup, because your birth control will be less effective, especially if you're on the pill, um,
yeah,
yeah,
antibiotics
or on
can help.
antibiotics. Yeah.
Yes.
So always, whichever contraceptive you're using, always good to have a discussion with your healthcare provider to know, sometimes when there's moments where it's not as effective, like if you're on antibiotics or anything like that, just so that you're safe.
Yes,
Um,
and that's very important. And because also another thing is we are humans and our bodies don't act the same way. So I think it's also very important to have an honest and open conversation with your healthcare providers so that they can
yeah.
advise accordingly.
Yeah, and if you want to be safe, or if you're having doubts about one method of birth control, you can always double barrier. You can always use like the pill and a condom, to just make sure that you're covered if you are feeling unsure. Um, yeah, and then that I think that's a good segue to the next poll. What are your thoughts
Yes.
on contraceptives? The options are I prefer condoms or I prefer the pull-out method.
Let's hear from the audience.
And just to unpack that in terms of the poll, 77% of people said I prefer condoms, and 23% I prefer the pull-out method.
Guys, the pull-out method is so high risk because it's actually not even a contraceptive, right? Because you can get the thing is, you can think you've pulled out, but um, you've already ejaculated. So I think it's important just to use a condom. And I like what Big Pop says here. Condoms all the way. The pull-out method has failed many people that I know. That's very
Mm,
true. And it's very important in understanding that.
yeah. Um, Always better to be safe than take any sort of risk like that, and it's incredibly risky. Um, but on another method of birth control, what are your thoughts on the injection? There's a lot of myths around the injection. There's a lot of fear around using the injection. But what is the injection? And the question on our poll was, does the injection cause weight gain?
Um, what is the audience thinking while we're unpacking it?
And just to go to the stats, 77% of people said that the injection causes weight gain, and 23% of people said that they disagree.
Um, and that's the beauty about a human body where we can all take the injections, but our bodies not all react the same way. And I think that's why having a relationship with your healthcare practitioner is very important in terms of you understanding um, the effects of the weight on, I mean, the effect of the contraceptive on your body. So I think it's also important to just not, it's a hearsay thing. We say so many people, Big Pop says so many people say they've gained weight because of the injection, and that makes the body jelly like. Is that true? So unfortunately, we can't comment in general because the injection affects different people differently, right? And I think it's also very important to have a relationship with the healthcare provider, because when you go into that, when you're going to take the injection, be it the 2 months or the 3 months one, there will be either a doctor or a nurse that gives you the shot, right? So have a discussion. It's your right to know. It's your right to. She must explain it to you, saying, okay, these are the consequences. This is what's happening, because what works for Tando won't necessarily work for Cassandra. What works for Cassandra won't necessarily work for Tepiso. So it's important to have that discussion with your healthcare provider.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of also having so many different options that you can always find one that works for you. And Nosi says that remember, contraceptives are hormones, and hormones balances are different in every individual. And that's true because like sometimes the pill is used to treat hormonal imbalances in women, and that's effective for them and can even help them with weight managers if they have an imbalance. But it all depends on your body and what works for you. Um,
Yes, because even for skin, when kids have teenagers have really bad acne, some dermatologists and some GPs actually prescribe the pill.
yeah, exactly. Um, but moving on to our next poll, one of the, sorry, but the poll says birth control causes infertility. And the options there are I agree, birth control causes infertility, or I disagree. What do you all think?
What do you all think?
And to unpack the responses a little bit, I think there were 30% of the poll said, I agree, birth control causes infertility, and 70% said, I disagree.
And I disagree is right because there has not been any scientific evidence that has proven that. Yes, obviously, depending on, I think it's also important that depending on how long you've been on the birth control, it will take some time to go off your system. For example, if maybe you've been on an injection for 10 years, right? It might take 6 months to close to a year or more to get it all out of your system. So there has not been any scientific evidence showing that because of taking an injection or any other type of birth control, the ladies were infertile.
That's really important to know. Um, yeah, I think I've heard a lot of people just be afraid that, if I go on the pill, it's gonna impact my fertility. I'm not gonna be able to have kids later on. But yeah, if you're hesitant, if you don't want to be on a type of hormonal contraceptive, find the option that works best for you. But the answer is false. But there's no scientific evidence that it causes infertility. Um, I'm going to go to some of the myths around early pregnancy, if that's okay, Nolutando.
Yes, you can.
Okay. Also part of the poll that Children of Success ran. And it's just questions around why young girls fall pregnant. And the first question is, or the first like response that we asked for is contraceptives or young girls are falling pregnant because contraceptives are expensive.
What do you guys think?
And to break that down a little bit, 21% of people said that they agree contraceptives are expensive and that's why young girls are falling pregnant. And 79% said I disagree. That's not the reason why girls are falling pregnant.
And the majority is right. Contraceptives are actually for free at any public health institution. So family planning, there's a family planning department. It's for free. And yes, so Nosi says contraceptives are for free at clinics. That's very true. So yes, so they are for free.
Yes, contraceptives are definitely for free. Um, Big Papa says they're expensive, but there are free options at government clinics. Yes, so if you're going the private route, it can be quite expensive. And they are for free at government clinics. But I think there's a little bit of nuance there because they're free, but the question for me is always, are they accessible? And some of the research on early pregnancy earlier this year showed that, especially during COVID-19, they were not accessible. Girls were just not able to get access to their usual contraceptives because of, like not being able to move around during lockdown and things like that. But also things like when girls go to healthcare clinics to get contraceptives, sometimes they're met by people who don't receive them well or who judge them or laugh at them or make them feel uncomfortable. So yes, they're free, but are we doing all that we can to make them accessible for everyone? Yeah.
Yeah, that's that's the painful part, but I think it's the painful part of our failure in the healthcare system, but also as a teenager, the best advice that I would give you is this is the part where you need to have a strong enough conviction to know that it is your right to receive them. It's your constitutional right. And also, yes, it's not nice that you not, I sympathize with you not receiving the service with dignity, because at the core of it is that person is meant to serve you with dignity, but it's also your future at stake. And that's the other conversation where it is the unfortunate part where it's a chicken and an egg situation, and you need to sort of put yourself first and
Yeah.
sort of cancel out the noise.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I really like that you brought it back to the fact that it is your constitutional right. You have the right to dignity, you have the right to equality, but your right to sexual and reproductive health care is also in Section 27 of the Constitution. And you, regardless of who says what, that is your right. And yeah, I think it is really great that more people know that this is something that they're entitled to. Um, yeah, going on to the next poll, uh, young girls are falling pregnant because contraceptives do not work. Is that true? What do you guys think?
What do you think?
And 9% of people said, I agree. Contraceptives, girls are falling pregnant because contraceptives don't work. And 91% said, I disagree.
I think this goes back to the earlier discussion we had that it's important to not just take an injection and walk out of your doctor or the nurse's office, right? It's important to have a conversation asking the healthcare practitioner, okay, cool. What are some of the limitations of this method, right? What happens when I'm on antibiotics? What happens when I have a runny stomach? What happens when I forget to take it? Let's say it's a pill, right? What's the duration around it? So it's very important to also be curious. This is your body. And I think for me, at the heart of this conversation is also maybe spark an interest where the attitude to around female bodies changes as a society, where
Mm,
a young girl is allowed to be curious about her body, her periods, contraceptives, the way they work, because it affects her body. And it's your right. It's okay for you to be curious. It's a normal thing to be curious. And it's not that there's something wrong with you as you ask the healthcare practitioner in terms of if I have flu, what happens? If I forget to take, let's say I miss my next date for the injection for whatever reason, how long is it still effective for? So yes.
yeah, and it's creating that space for girls and boys to be curious without being shamed and without being, especially for girls, being described as loose or something like that. But to know that you have the right to have this information to make these decisions about your body, because it's your body and you know what's best for you and you know which option works best for you. So yeah, remembering that that is your right to information. Um, yeah, the moving on to the next poll, young girls fall pregnant because they are victims of sexual assault. 82% agree and 18% disagree.
So the unfortunate part in South Africa is that there's not much research around this area, right? And right now, as we do the work, it's almost it's a guess 22, where yes, there are victims of sexual assault, but there are also people that have chosen to be sexually active and didn't know and didn't have any information around it. So it's a catch 22 because there has not been proper studies that has been conducted by governments, and it's a guess. It's we Yes, as Ms. Makubeju says, some of them fall pregnant because of gender-based violence, some of them it's a choice. So it's a guess 22 right now.
Mm. And I think it's so important because the stats don't come out with figures saying this number of pregnancies were caused by sexual violence and this number was caused by consensual sex. Because we don't have those figures yet, it's important to have a conversation about all the driving factors so that we don't leave anything out, so that we talk about contraceptives, we talk about consent, we talk about rape and sexual violence, and we talk about education and the need for that. So yeah, I really like that this conversation has sort of touched on so many different drivers of early pregnancy, because then it opens up to think of uh, uh, solutions. Sorry, I don't know why that word escaped me, but it opens us up to think of solutions that are also broad and speak to the problem without just looking at one thing and solving it in one manner. Um, but to go to the last poll, and I see we're running out of time slightly. So
Yeah.
just the last one is young girls fall pregnant because they do not understand how reproduction happens. And 40% of people agreed with that, and 56% disagreed with that. That's a really interesting one for me.
It is a very interesting one because we, as we previously explained, is because we don't know all the facts because there's not enough in-depth research that has been conducted and studies that has been done. But sexual education, with the work that we're doing and when we're on the ground, a lot of the time is sexual education is not done. And even if it's done at a hostile level where someone will say, you're on your periods, run away from boys. Boys are bad for you. You're going to be pregnant. Like as if touching a boy will make you pregnant. You no longer, you can't be friends with boys anymore. Right? And it's done from a place of trauma from our parents instead of from a place of, okay, this is, you're on your periods. This is what your periods mean, right? And your body will start changing like this. And you only fall pregnant if this is what you, if you're having sex with a boy. And I think that's also very important in terms of the work that we're doing on the ground. We're picking up a lot that even if there is education, but it's done from a place of trauma.
Mm, wow. I'm gonna try and switch on my camera and hope that my Wi-Fi stays. But I 100% agree with you. And I think there's so much to unpack there when we talk about sex education and creating an environment where girls and boys and all children can learn and ask questions and make informed decisions without any shame. So I'm really glad that we had this first discussion and really looking forward to the next few conversations that we're going to have. But thank you so much. And yeah, do you want to close us off with some final words of wisdom?
um, Thank you so much for hosting us, and thank you so much for the convo. And I think the most important thing I would love to leave the girl child with is that self love and accepting your body is the beginning of a journey to girlhood. And to the parents watching this and to the adults watching this, is may we change our education and may we change our attitude around the female body and what it represents. Um, it's not, periods are not dirty. Changes simply going through into puberty does not mean the kid is at risk of getting pregnant. I think we need to change, as adults, we need to change our tone around a female body and affirm girls more, give girls the confidence so that it's okay for adolescents to be curious. It's okay for them to ask questions. Create safe spaces where they can come to us saying, we might not know all the answers, but we can refer you to someone who knows the answer, like be it your doctor, be it someone. And I think it's very important, how do we create safe spaces within communities where kids can be kids and their innocence can never be stolen.
Wow, thank you so much for that. And if anyone in the audience is interested in also taking action, Amnesty International is also running an early pregnancy campaign where you can write to the president and send a message to him about why this issue is important, and make sure that this is top of the agenda so that we're fixing the other elements of the healthcare system and the criminal justice system, so that when children are violated, they're getting the justice that they deserve. When they go to a healthcare, to a clinic, they're getting contraceptives, or they're getting education without shame. There's so many different elements of the system that need to come together to address this problem. But it's incredible to have this discussion with you, Nolutanda, and thank you so much, and thank you to the audience as well. Really looking forward to the next one.
Thank you. Bye, guys. Have a great Sunday evening.
Bye.